Welcome to the ultimate podcast guide for beginners. Over the past few years, I've gone from being obsessed with listening to podcasts to starting one as a hobby to eventually starting my own creative agency where I produce and launch podcasts for other creators. In addition to hosting my own show, Creator Club, I've helped tons of other creators of all sizes to start their own podcast, and I'm so excited to be helping you to start your podcast today. In case we haven't met, I'm Steckly, and this is the Ultimate Podcast Guide for Beginners. In this series, I'm going to be teaching you everything you need to know to get your podcast started. In this video, we're going to be talking about creating a plan to start a successful podcast, including coming up with your niche, your title, your branding, and your first few episode ideas. In the following videos, I'm going to be teaching you everything you need to know about recording, editing, and publishing your podcast to Apple Podcasts and Spotify. All of these videos are going to be linked in this playlist, but I am also going to make sure that I link episode 2 at the end of this video and then episode 3 at the end of the next one. You get it. You can watch them all in order. So make sure you grab a pen and paper and get ready to brainstorm because I'm going to be taking you through everything you need to know to start a successful podcast. Let's get into it. The first step is to pick your topic. Now, chances are if you searched for this video, you probably already have an idea in mind. And honestly, if you're doing your podcast as a fun hobby with friends or a passion project, you can pretty much skip this step and most of this video. The point of this video is to show you how to come up with a podcast idea that is going to be successful. And if you don't care about turning your podcast into a business one day, then don't worry about it. I want to encourage you to pursue your creative passions, even if they won't become a successful business venture. But this video includes the really important foundation that you need to build if you do want to turn your podcast ultimately into a profitable brand. In fact, I would say that this episode in this 4-part series is probably the most important one for you to watch if you do want to make your podcast profitable. You need to lay down this foundation before you can build into a business. When you do have a topic or niche in mind, the first important step you need to take is doing market research. The most basic way to start out doing this is just to simply go into Spotify or the Apple Podcast app and start searching keywords that are related to the topic that you want your podcast to be about. Don't worry if when you search you find a ton of existing shows that are similar and in the same kind of niche that you want to create in. This is actually a good sign because it means that there is an existing audience that is interested in the content that you want to provide. Just take a look at the different shows, maybe listen to some of each of them, and try to figure out how you're going to differentiate yourself in that niche. It's great. There's an existing audience interested in that content. You just need to figure out how you're going to stand out and what value that you can offer that is going to make your show stand out in the crowd. You can't expect to just duplicate an existing show's format or content and then think that that is going to help you grow an audience because chances are if somebody else is already doing exactly what you want to be doing, they've had more practice, they've had more time to build an audience, and so you doing the exact same thing as them is not going to be successful. But if you can think about how your personality, your point of view, or the way that you talk about that content can differentiate you, then you definitely have a chance to grow in that niche. If, on the other hand, you search for keywords related to your show and you find absolutely nothing already out there in that niche, that could mean one of two things. Maybe there isn't an audience for it, like maybe there just aren't enough people searching for that in the podcast app to create a demand for what you want to supply. Honestly, I think that that is the less likely of the two. The other situation could be that you're just the first to think of this. There is an audience, there's a gap in the market that you can fill, in which case start as soon as possible and get your podcast out there. There are so many people in the world and the number of people that are listening to podcasts just continues to grow, so it is very likely that there will be an audience for what you want to talk about. It's just important that you do some market research to make sure that your show is going to be successful. In addition to looking in the Apple Podcast app and on Spotify, check out Facebook groups, Instagram pages, YouTube channels. See if there are other creators out there talking about what you want to talk about, and then figure out what kind of audience they have, who those people are, what they're interested in, and how you can attract them to listen to your podcast. Once you've done some market research and you've settled into a niche and a topic for your show, now it's time to dive into the specifics of format. Do you want to create an interview or a solo show? Now, don't get me wrong, interview shows can be really great, but I do just want to warn you that a lot of people default to thinking, oh, I'll just start an interview podcast and I'll interview cool people that I want to talk to. That's awesome, but there are a lot of people doing that, and it can be easy to kind of get lazy with an interview show. So you want to make sure that you're thinking about how you can provide value to your ideal audience. And how can you stand out among the hundreds of existing interview shows out there? On the other hand, if you're leaning towards a solo podcast, that can be awesome too, but just know that there is a ton of pre-production work that goes into that. In order to make a 30 to 40 minute episode, the script that you write needs to be very long. That is the biggest thing that surprised me when I started producing my own workshop style solo show, is that I would write thousands of words and still end up with like a 15-minute episode. So be warned that it can take a lot of time to plan and produce solo episodes if you want them to be like jam-packed full with value. However, if you're going to do an interview show right, it does take time to reach out to your guests, prepare good questions for your interviews, and figure out how you're going to frame up the interview so that you can provide value to your listeners. So either way, it's going to take time and effort to produce a good podcast. Just figure out how you would prefer to spend your time. Would you rather prepare and interview guests, or would you rather write your own scripts and produce a solo show? And when you're thinking about that, make sure you keep in mind what your ideal audience might be interested in. Once you've decided what your format is going to be, it's time for us to move on to the next step, which is coming up with your first 10 episode ideas. So to help you with this and this entire process, actually, I've created a document that you can grab for free at katiesteckly.com/podcast plan. This is a document that I use and the process that I use for creating my own podcast and helping others, and it'll walk you through everything that I'm talking about in this video. So before we dive into the next section, I would encourage you to open up a new tab, pop over to katiesteckly.com/podcast plan and throw your email address in there, and I will send you the link to the Google Doc that you can use to follow along in the next few steps. Okay, so once you've entered in your findings from the last couple steps, like the format that you want to do and what your topic or niche is, let's talk about the first box that you're going to fill out, and that is, how are you going to provide value to your audience? Even if you're just doing interviews, maybe especially if you're doing interviews, ask yourself, what is a listener going to get out of this? Why would somebody listen to my podcast? And what is going to make them click play when they see it? Especially with interview shows, there can be a temptation to just say, I want to share people's stories. And that's great. That's a really noble cause. But why would somebody listen to that? You really need to think specifically about what value you provide and why people are going to be interested in dedicating half an hour to 45 minutes of their time listening to your podcast. Think specifically about what is going to make someone click play. Because if you can't even get them to click play, they're never going to be a fan of your podcast. So really spend some time thinking about how you provide value. What's the reason behind people subscribing to and listening to your show? If you have to, pause the video now, write down some notes about what value you're going to provide, and then we'll move on to the next stage. Okay, now it's time to actually start brainstorming your episode titles and episode ideas. I've left space in the document for 10 episode ideas. And yes, I would encourage you to actually come up with the idea for the title before you ever start writing the script. Half of the success of your podcast is going to be your ability to pique people's interest and get them to press play on your episode. If you can't even get them to press play, they'll never be able to listen to it and fall in love with the value that you're providing. So you really want to focus from the very beginning on how you're going to capture people's attention. Focus on writing headline-worthy titles that your listeners will not be able to resist. So why are we coming up with 10? It's not just a vague number. There's a reason why I want you to come up with 10 episode ideas. Ideally, when you're launching your podcast, I would recommend launching with 4 episodes. And if you're not sure how to do that, don't worry, we're going to cover launching in the 4th episode of this series. But you probably want to launch your podcast with 4 available episodes so that your listeners can go and binge and become obsessed with what you're providing. They're more likely to subscribe if they're able to get more chances to listen to what you're offering before they decide if they subscribe. So it's really great to launch with 4. And then the reason why in total you want to come up with 10 is because I would recommend having 5 other ideas ready to go for the month or so after you launch. So after the launch, you'll have a month of content ready. And then during that month of your scheduled episodes going live, you have time to plan and produce your next set of episodes after that. In general, I always recommend batch working. It is going to be so much more efficient than trying to produce your episodes week to week. If you can write all your scripts at once, sit down and record all of your episodes at once, and then edit them all at once, it's just going to be a lot more of an efficient process. So that is what I would recommend doing. So take some time and think about what your 10 episode ideas could be. I would recommend looking through some of your favorite podcasts, read their titles, think about what about those titles makes you want to click, and then how can you take that same essence or same format and make it work for your niche so that you can intrigue your listeners. Now that you've spent some time thinking about your niche, how you're going to provide value, and what your episode titles are going to be, it's finally time for us to come up with the title of your podcast. Hopefully, after you've done all of this brainstorming and thinking about how you're going to provide value, what you're going to be to your listeners, that might actually help you come up with a title that is going to be applicable. This is my recommendation to you. I want you to come up with a title that is creative and unique, but also isn't that difficult to spell or search. Also, in addition to a hopefully short and succinct title, you can add a bit of a subtitle that can follow after it that is going to target search keywords and SEO. So let me explain what I mean by that. We'll use my own podcast as an example for this process. So when I was coming up with my podcast idea, I know I wanted to have something with creator in the title because that is my ideal audience. I teach other creator strategies for content creation and social media marketing. But I also wanted to give off the vibe of a community. We're all learning from each other and we're here to connect and build relationships. So that's how I came up with the idea of the word club. It was just a little bit shorter and I think a little bit more fun than creator community. It sounds too generic, but creator club has more of a ring to it in my opinion. The best part about creator club is that it is easy to search, say, and spell. So I can easily tell people, go search for Creator Club on Apple Podcasts and they will be able to find it. Plus, when I was doing my initial market research, there weren't any huge podcasts that were already using that terminology, so I knew that I would be able to rise to the top of the search results. Then to make the SEO side of it work for me, because I know not everybody's going to be searching for Creator Club unless they already know about my podcast, I want to be able to attach some words to the title that people who might not know about me yet might be searching for. And so my podcast title is Creator Club, content creation and social media marketing. This has actually worked for me really well. I've had people send me a DM saying that they found my podcast by searching for content creation in the Apple Podcast app. And so this combination of a quick and succinct title that is easy to say, search, and spell, plus a subtitle that hits on some keywords that people might be searching for, that is going to be the perfect formula for a title that is going to generate new listeners and then also help your listeners from other platforms find your podcast. All right, with all of that being said, let's dive into the fun stuff. Let's talk about how you are going to create the visual branding for your podcast. All of the work that we've done up until now, that is the abstract branding, thinking about your niche, your ideal audience, the kind of episodes you're going to make. So now that we have that information, we can take that and try to embody it in a visual format. So this is my quick start guide for creating a visual brand for your podcast. I like to call this the 3-2-1 guide. That's just something that I made up because I think it's fun and easy to remember. And I'll tell you what the 3-2-1 stands for. So first, you're going to choose 3 brand colors. Ideally, you would have one that is light, dark, and neutral. That's just a good combination so that you kind of have a color for each situation. I would recommend using a site like color.adobe.com. This is a great way to create color schemes because you can choose if you want to do a complementary color palette. There's all kinds of different options and you can play around and move the cursor around the color wheel and it'll automatically populate corresponding colors for you. This is a great way to make sure that your colors are going to go well together according to color theory, which is what the Adobe website is using. Once you've chosen your 3 brand colors, what you can do is actually select them in the website and then copy the hex code that is associated with it. Then you can go back over to that document that I provided for you, select one of the 3 boxes under the brand guide section, click on the bucket tool inside Google Docs, and then if you press the plus under custom, you'll be able to paste that hex code that you just copied so you can get your exact brand color into that podcast document. You can do that with all 3 of your colors, and that way you have the exact shade preserved in that document for your future use with your podcast art or any other social media marketing you want to do in the future. Okay, so that's 3 for 3 colors. Let's move on to the 2 part of the 3-2-1 brand guide, and that is choosing 2 fonts. I suggest choosing a display font and a body font. So that's a font that you could use for your title. It's a little bit more stylized, and then you have a font that you could use maybe for a subtitle or to add your name onto the cover or whatever. It's just going to be easy to read, and hopefully those 2 fonts go together well. So what you can do is actually directly inside Google Docs, just select the text that I have written as display font, and then go up to change the font, and then you can actually click on more fonts to get access to the almost limitless library of free fonts that Google provides. You're able to download these fonts to use them on your computer if you have other editing software, and you can also upload them to your website later if you create one. It's really great to use a Google font because it's just really accessible across the internet. Plus, there are so many options, so you're definitely going to be able to find one that suits your brand. All right, now as for the 1 part of our 3-2-1 brand guide, I recommend coming up with one symbol or shape or visual motif that is going to be connected to your brand. So maybe that could be triangles or like polka dots or stripes, a lightning bolt, whatever really suits what you want to be talking about. Pick one shape or graphic that you can use repeatedly because that can kind of become your logo or something that's associated visually with your brand so that your listeners kind of get to remember what your podcast looks like. And to avoid making it too busy, I recommend just picking one, at least for now. And now with our trusty brand guide to guide us through, we are now going to create your podcast art. I'm going to show you how to do this in Canva because it is a free and accessible software to everybody. All you have to do is go to canva.com and I will walk you through the rest of the steps. Okay, so once you're at Canva, you're going to create a new design. You're going to need to enter custom dimensions, and I would suggest doing 3000 by 3000. Podcast art can be anywhere between 1400 by 1400 to 3000 by 3000 pixels, but I recommend just going for the most high quality you can, because why not? You can scroll through the templates that Canva will automatically populate that suit your chosen dimensions and see if anything sparks your creativity. The awesome thing about Canva is that you really can take a template and make it your own, so you can totally customize it, change it around. It might just give you a starting point for the kind of visual composition you might want to do. If you have a chosen template, you can actually go in to any element on the art. Then in the top left-hand corner, you'll see the color that is associated with that part of the podcast art. You can click on that, and then you can actually go back to your Google Doc, copy the hex code associated with one of your brand colors, and then paste it into Canva so you can get that exact shade that you chose onto your podcast art. If you don't find any template that you're in love with, then you can start from scratch and just scroll through the different visual elements they provide. There are so many awesome free options that I'm sure you'll be able to find something that suits your brand and you can build your artwork from scratch. Also, if you want to include a photo of yourself, like if your podcast is associated with you as a host or as a personal brand, you can upload your photo, arrange it on a background, and then add any graphics or text you want from there. And then finally, you're just going to save that as a JPEG somewhere on your computer that you can find later. We will come back to this in episode 4. Now you've got all of the groundwork laid for a successful podcast with a title, a niche, a brand, and your first 10 episodes already planned out. The next step is recording your first episode. So go ahead and click on this video to learn about the microphone options for you and how to record an episode so that you'll be ready to edit it, which is what episode 3 is about. So if you want to learn how to record your podcast, go ahead and click on this video to watch that next. Also, make sure to hit the subscribe button because it really supports my channel and I really appreciate it. But more than anything, just go watch this next video because I know it is going to be helpful for you. So as always, thanks so much for watching and I will see you in this video. Bye.